So, not my usual second channel type of content. This is kind of a follow up to my FD signifier political wrestler reflection. But I wanted to expand on things that have happened on Twitch. We need to understand that, and I'm not going to litigate what has happened. I don't really care. Yes, this is about Mike from PA versus Gremlo. Yes, this is about Rhizome and Vio. Yes, this is about Cinemarxism and Gremlo and their behavior. I am not here to relitigate all of that stuff because, quite frankly, there are people who have better breakdowns. We don't need this broken down a million times. We should talk about the general structure as to why this stuff keeps happening on the left. Why do we keep seeing bad behavior, particularly from white men in this space, and then get outed again as like either like an abuser, a misogynist, a creep. Like this is consistently happening, right? And we need to talk about how streamers are supposed to operate, like general professionalism, which I can't believe I have to break down, and what obligations do you have in the personal to the broader movement, right? We need to understand, right? If you are a viewer, that the internal feelings of your streamers are likely not something you know. You might really think you know your streamer, but like the reality is you only see a segment of their life. You don't know what their internal feelings are. You don't know who dislikes who. You don't know what is going on behind the scenes, right? And you have no clue about their general offline behavior because whatever you do get shown, right? Whatever gets leaked is either by the streamer themselves or by another streamer, right? And that could be a selective thing. You're never going to be with them 24/7 in order to know exactly what the fuck's happening. And there's a lot of personal information that is concealed and for very good reasons. Stalkers, other people, wanting to especially in the left space, like, people who wanna actually wish harm on them, right? Like, we actually have, like, cases of people, um, being clipped out of context. It could potentially lead to violence, specifically with, like, the case with, like, Hassan. These are all things that should remain at the discretion of the individual streamer, right? And then you have things, especially on the left, that's going to matter, and I put this in the personal because it is about your personal experiences. Your marginalized status will determine how you see the world, right? So we can have marginalized statuses that are discrete, so things that people might not immediately know. Like, I don't really like the term like straight passing because I just don't like it. I don't like the idea of like presentation being tied to one's sexuality. But there are people who perhaps two straight people might not seem gay, right? So we have stuff like that. There might be, say, if you're trans, you might be passing at a rate where people don't immediately assume that you're trans, so on and so forth for discrete, right? Context discrete or semi discrete is it's going to be dependent on who you're around and um like what country you're in. I personally don't see her as white, but people within the MENA region, like Vio, like Hassan, can be classified as white, you know? So you have semi-discrete and context discrete, where, especially when it comes to racialized identities, who you're around will determine your whiteness. And then you have something like overt marginalized statuses, which is, say, if you are someone who is neurodivergent and cannot mask, right? Like, or you have struggles with that, right? Now, or someone who might have, say, um, a very visible disability, right? Not all disability is overt, but the ones that are overt, you cannot hide it, right? Like if you are missing a leg, you cannot hide that from people. Um, for the most part, right? Or if you cannot hide the fact that you are, say, in a wheelchair, right? These are things that are overt. Now, of course, like disability, there's some people who are not 24/7 in a wheelchair. We're not going to get all into that, right? But marginalized status is huge, especially as left leaning creators, because we understand the structural oppression, right? Like if you're on the left, assuming you are principled, you should understand how marginalized identities play into capitalism and play into one's status within a capitalistic structure, within a patriarchal structure, within a white supremacist structure, right? Like these are things I don't think any leftist or anyone who is in these left leaning spaces needs to be explained to them. But somehow, the internal biases come out to play, and we need to talk about it all the fucking time. So that is all the personal, right? This is all the stuff that is predominantly at the discretion of the streamer. You might not know exactly how they feel about other streamers. You might not even know how they feel about their own community, right? Like you don't know if your streamer actually likes you or not. Wink wink. Um you don't know what their offline behavior is predominantly, right? You don't know what they're doing. You don't know who they hang out with. They might tell you certain people, but you never know, right? And so the personal is all the shit that you as a viewer are selectively privy to, right? It is up to the discretion of the streamer to tell you all these things if they want to. And streamers have a added layer, right? Especially if they're friends with each other, of peer-to-peer collaboration, of being functionally coworkers, right? Like that whole thing with like Ludwig being like, Hassan is my coworker. That is functionally what streamers are, right? They can be each other's friends, but they also live in the same professional space, or parties involved are entertainers, right? So that can come in the forms of who they collaborate with, who they decide to raid, who they decide to talk about on their streams. Any public statements made, right? These are professional statements, regardless of how unprofessional they appear. If you say something in public, that is a part of your professional platform as a streamer, right? And so when people are surprised, like, you know, how could I have XYZ consequence to my behavior? Again, that was your professional platform. That is something you actively chose to say. And I feel like every time I hear streamers be surprised that their public behavior has consequences, right? And even their private behavior has consequences depending on if things get leaked. And obviously there are some reasons why things get leaked, but overall this is a professional taboo, right? And there obviously is a viewership hierarchy, right? Because the more people you have watching you, the more people you can mobilize, the more you are probably well financially off. Streamers have an obligation to use their platforms appropriately, right? Or at least leftist streamers, right? Like if you are a principled leftist streamer, you should be using your platform appropriately. However, it is still a public platform, and you cannot control everybody who's in there. And so, something that I think is not ever really discussed is how many times have third party instigators, especially a certain liberal community, often instigates, right? There are people who will actively go into left leaning spaces to instigate problems. And yes, streamers are obligated to use their platforms appropriately, but they cannot control the fact that they're on a public platform, and these people can pop up at any time. We have these kind of rules, right? We have these rules where, you keep things professional. You try to not leak any personal information. You try to not let the personal affect either both your professional career and, of course, in the case of leftism, the broader movement, right? I don't feel like I need to explain this whole column. I feel like the vast majority of people, if you are on the left, you already know. If you're obviously if you're anti-electoral, you probably don't care about this part. But you know, if streamers want to use their platform, they can, of course, push that. into meaning things for elections. They can mean things like donating, phone banking, interviewing, canvassing, right? Like they can mobilize people. That's kind of the whole thing, is that something within the left leaning space that we try to do compared to other leaning, like other spaces, is to actually get people out there and have more viewers funnel into this, into the broader movement, into doing things outside, into building things that are bigger than themselves. The issue, right, is things that streamers do professionally, and sometimes even what they do on a personal front, have a lot of implications for how the movement is seen on the news, right? Where do viewers exist in this dynamic? Now, where do viewers exist in the personal? The answer is fucking nowhere. Okay, the answer is nowhere. You don't know these people personally. Again, different story if you're their partner, maybe you are their mod and friend. Okay, different fucking story. But the average fucking viewer, you don't know these people. You don't know them. Even if you dislike them, you don't know them. You do not know these people. Okay? Where do viewers exist in their professional lives, in a streamer's professional life? Well, chatters are a reflection of their streamers, right? So if you have a digital third space, which is what a community online is, it's a digital third space, and you are not making that community a safe place for marginalized identities, how can you be considered a left leaning space, right? And this is not just like this situation in particular. This is every situation on the left, right? This is every situation on the left. How can women feel safe if you were trying to be a sex pest? How are black people supposed to be feeling safe if you are fine with using microaggressions towards them, right? You create the space as a streamer. That is your responsibility. And again, I'll reiterate, you might not be able to control everyone present there, but you can curtail the overall atmosphere of your bar, right? Like if you were to turn this into a physical place, maybe it's a bar, maybe it's an arcade, I don't know, maybe it's the park. You get to decide who you kick out. And if you kick out someone of a marginalized identity, or you kick out someone who said, "Hey, this place didn't make me feel safe," what does that say about you? Right? What does that actually say about your space in general? If someone says, "Hey, listen, I like going to this bar, but Johnny Third Foot over there says kind of weird stuff about Asian women." And you go, I don't know, man. Like, you're just kind of like being sensitive. That's not a safe space for marginalized identities. A lot of times, in these spaces, the whistleblowers tend to be women, right? We've seen this not even in just the digital online, but leftist movements in general. The fall of the Black Panthers, Cesar Chavez's movement, right? Like people have glossed over this part of making a leftist space because it's not enough to be anti-capital, you know? There are people who insist upon, "Oh, I'm like an anti-capital MAGA person." That shit don't make sense. Without having both of these factors, this cannot be a leftist space, right? Because we have to understand that marginalization affects one's place in capitalism, right? And so you can't have a left-leaning space if you're not willing to hear out marginalized identities, make sure you have a space for them. It's also why I don't really like this whole woke one versus woke two thing that people are doing. I understand the logistics of why people are saying it, but again, we can't make a leftist space if you don't have these two factors. Where do chatters exist in the broader movement? You guys should be touching fucking grass. You know? Like, and I say that for myself as well. Like when people are like, "Oh, this is petty drama," that's not petty drama. We're determining what is a left-leaning space, right? And ideally, we should be spending more time not having to litigate and do more of this stuff. But how can we determine who is a safe person to be with if we're not willing to talk about this stuff, right? This is exactly why people don't come out about Andrew Callahan about Lowell overruled. Um, and then further back in history, like I've mentioned, with the Black Panther movement, with Cesar Chavez, we cannot leave this fact behind. Because when people are like, marginalization is just a distraction from the anti-capital stuff, or this is all just petty drama, you're saying one half of being a leftist doesn't fucking matter to you. You're not a leftist if you actually believe that. You're not someone who's safe, right? I'm not saying just as a woman. I'm saying like it could be for your sexuality, it could be for your religion, it could be for a disability, it could be for many, many things. And so when we don't make a safe space for the marginalized, you don't have a leftist space. You just don't. Right? It's just another online community. We understand that Twitch is just a space on the internet, right? Twitch is part of the space that discourse is provided on. Like, yeah, we could have added YouTube here, but realistically, these are like the three main places most of the shit always falls down on, right? And so when it comes to professional and personal grievances being aired out, it's usually on Twitch, it's usually on Twitter, it's usually in Discords altogether, right? It's usually through maybe DMs or like I don't know, a splintered Discord a splintered Discord cell, right? But just because this is on the internet doesn't mean that it doesn't have any in-person consequences, right? If you're a full-time streamer, your finances get affected, right? Your friendships get affected because most of the people you know are probably also other streamers. Your capacity to organize and be a part of the broader movement gets stifled because now you have clips and sound bites that can be used against you. And your general safety decreases, right? Because now you have potentially a financial freefall, potentially issues of people trying to weaponize this and put you in a dangerous situation. And here's the thing, not every single time that it affects you in person, like your finances, is necessarily victimhood, right? Sometimes this could just be the consequences of the public statements you've made, right? Like that's the whole idea behind cancellations, right? Of of why viewers step away from communities. Your public behavior can affect all these things, and that can be warranted or unwarranted depending on context, right? And so when we're looking at all of this, it's all happening under capitalism, under like supremacist structures. Like, yes, it happens on Twitch. Yes, it happens in the Discord. Yes, it happens on Twitter. These things, right? It can affect your finances. It can affect your friendships. It can affect your capacity to be a part of the broader movement and organize. It can affect your personal safety. This is all stuff that happens in person, right? And all this shit happens under capitalism. It happens under patriarchy. It happens under white supremacy, right? Because these things are baked into capitalism, are baked into Twitch, because Twitch is a company, right? And everyone under capitalism, regardless of how good your boss is, regardless of how good your company is going to be subjected to these superstructures. Because unless if capitalism is dismantled, Twitch is always going to have these problems in their attempts to make money, right? And this is why we see some of the biggest streamers being some of the biggest bigots on the platform. Not to even just mention like Twitch culture in general being kind of one of the worst parts of the internet, beyond Twitter too, and Discord, right? Because it's all the same fucking people. When people of marginalized statuses are trying to find their safe space, you cannot be surprised. You just can't be surprised if your public statements have affected these things, right? And they have decided, actually, I want out of this area. I want out because I don't feel safe here anymore. It almost feels like people don't understand the professional and the personal part. Like, you as a viewer, again, do not need to exist in their personal, right? And I would even say, if you know more for their personal information, it would be wise, right, to understand professional consequences, right? Like if you are a mod, if you are another small streamer, there are professional consequences to these actions. And I'm not saying that as a like, oh, corporo HR thing. You are trying to build a leftist space thing. It's kind of like it feels like emotionally silly to have to break this down, but it almost feels like people don't understand that like adding your streamers or trying to, you know, publicly get people to change their personal is not going to happen. But it's ultimately up to the parties involved to sort the personal, right? It is up to the parties involved to sort the personal. And you know what? Sometimes, and call me crazy, you're allowed to have a hard line. You're allowed to have a hard line with how you've been personally treated. Because if you determine there is no going back and that this person is not a left leaning space, this person is not a safe space, you're allowed to say, hey, I don't want to work with this person because they've harassed my partner. I don't want to work with this person because they called me hysterical. I don't want to associate with this person because they have hurt someone of a marginalized identity. And you don't have to hide that away for the broader movement. This is exactly what happened with Graham Plattner. This is exactly what happened with Lowell Overruled. This is exactly what happened with Andrew Callahan, right? You're allowed to have a hard line if you've been harassed, if your marginalized identities, your marginalized status is not taken seriously, and ultimately you did not find yourself in a left leaning safe space. Now more than ever, there is election consequences to what's happening on Twitch. So, I don't know. Like, I hate to say it, just like sometimes you guys need to be a little bit more professional. Like, sometimes you guys need to actually like think about your actions. There are eyes on this movement, right? It's come down to the way that they've perceived DSA's platform. It's come down to the way that politicians have associated or potential politicians have associated with certain Twitch streamers. Now more than ever, people need to be in solidarity with each other, but also people need to stay principled. And sometimes being principled also means having your hard lines of who gets to be considered a safe space.